Trauma, that's a word that gets thrown around a ton these days. And when it happens, it can lose its power, especially when real trauma has been encountered and endured. So, what if you truly have suffered through, or maybe even continue to struggle with trauma? What do you do then? Well, there's therapy, psychedelics, spiritual quests, and a host of other things. And while many of those can be successful, it takes time, patience, and guidance to know the path forward to see what it truly looks like. Well, today, my guest shares the path on his healing journey and how he has transformed his pain into multiple businesses. Now, before we get into that, we all know that men today are struggling like never before. And it's because we feel this pain and it's real for us. And it's a pain of loneliness and unworthiness, and it's masked by our anger and our resentment. And it's all because we are uncertain and afraid to take that next step. So if you're tired and fed up of where your life is at, then I'm going to encourage you to start your hero's quest, where you can become more, live more, and accomplish more than ever before. Go to members.theawakenedman.net and start your quest today. Now, let's get on with today's episode. Welcome, everyone, to the Revolutionary Man podcast. I'm the founder of the Awakened Man movement and your host, Alan DeMonso. So tell me, how has trauma influenced your life? Has it been for the better or for worse? Each of our recovery paths is going to look different. Some stages may even sound and feel the same, but the truth is that their difference lies within the mindset and how it shapes us. And my guest today would say it would take you from a doomer to a bloomer. So allow me to introduce my guest. Will Nemo is a multifaceted entrepreneur and visionary committed to liberating the all-true only doomer bloomers from tyranny and enslavement. And his portfolio of events includes the Yukon Gold Partnership Limited, the Doomer Bloomer Institute, and the Daily Daoist Foundation. Will is a thought leader in the fields ranging from energy and Taoism to leadership, mental health, and entrepreneurship. Will's ultimate goal extends beyond personal wealth. He is driven to empower others to live their most fulfilling life. Welcome to the show, Will. How are things today, my brother?
Good, Elaine. I am just grounding myself on my grounding mat as we speak. The energy is good today for Saturday. It's my self-care Saturday, and I encourage you, if you don't have a routine like that, to do so. Thank you for that really warm welcome. It's been about a year now since we've known each other when you were on my podcast, the Doomer Bloomers podcast. Since that time, obviously you've seen my development, or you've seen development in some different areas, different fields. I really encourage you to check out theawakenedman.net and join Elaine's program. It's a 12-month, 12-step, and it's a monthly virtue type program, very similar actually to the Doomer Bloomers Institute PhD, All True PhD program. And yeah, I'm here honestly just to be, I don't even want to say a guide. I just want to be a voice in the wilderness that is the internet. As you know, Elaine, it's a very noisy and a very busy place out there. And I live my life through service, really. I learned that from Dr. Wayne Dyer. I picked up his book, Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life, in 2017 when I was going through a period of struggle myself. And I was in the middle end of an unemployment stint. And I stayed the winter at my aunt and uncle's house, and prior to that, I'd spent most of my middle 20s actually couch surfing because I couldn't afford to make rent most months, to be honest. And I bounced back and forth between couch surfing and staying at my parents' place or my mother's place. And I think that's an issue for a lot of young people between the ages of 24 and even up into the middle 30s. We've reached a point in history of what they call hyperinflation. And just to give you a little bit of background on that, once they went off of the gold standard in 1972. Our
Mm.
current money system is not backed by not anything substantial. So in order to create money now in the fractional reserve system, they just go ask the Federal Reserve. They create, let's say, $100 million, $100 million, and they loan that money to the U.S. government in treasury bonds, and the treasury bonds get then owed back to the Federal Reserve, and the cycle continues. But that then pushes all of that inflation on your currents to the sea, right? Money is just a transfer of energy onto the populace, right? And the control in this world, unfortunately, is held in a very small majority at the top, in the 1% or less. And if you haven't looked into this, I really definitely encourage you. Part of my program teaches financial responsibility or fiscal responsibility. These are things I've learned myself. I've put myself through this program in the last 5 years, and it deals with things like trauma, financial responsibility, taking care of your self-care. I have a saying that says, check yourself before you wreck yourself.
Mm.
And my tale is really a cautionary tale. Besides my Tao leanings, I would say between the ages, after 17, graduating high school and then moving into the workforce, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And I think that's something that most young people, especially in the 18 to 24 range, they would be, if you were born in 1999 to 2000, you'd be coming into that 20 to 24 range now. Some of you are in universities because your parents could afford to send you to university, right? My parents never or couldn't self-actualize themselves in the previous generation. So they didn't have not TFSAs, the educational funds that set aside for me and my brother and my sister to go to school. So for myself, right out of school, the options were hit the oil patch and go work for BC Hydro. I didn't get the scholarship that was offered in my grade 11th year to go to University of Northern British Columbia in Prince George. A lot of my friends around my age group, they took a different path and they took the university path. And that works for some people. For me personally, it didn't. I went to engineering school instead. I went to trade school instead. And I attempted to think about going back to post-secondary in 2012. And I was going to go to the University of Alberta, and I was considering going to do a bachelor of theater. And I wasn't sure really. I'd come off of the Katimavik program in 2010, and 2011 I'd come out of the Odyssey program, which is a French exchange program in Quebec, and I was teaching English and then living in Quebec. And I met a lot of great people through both Katimavik and through the Odyssey program, But then again, I'd reached my early to mid 20s, and at the time, I think they were calling it a quarter life crisis. I don't know. Have you heard that term, Elaine? Quarter life crisis?
Yeah, no, I haven't heard that. That's an
Right.
interesting one. I'm very familiar with midlife, but tell me a little bit more about this quarter life.
Well, a quarter life crisis is basically there's the midlife and then there's the quarter life, right? So you got your 55-year-olds buying sports cars, and then you got your 25-year-olds starting their own rock bands and startup ventures, right?
Yeah.
And we have reached a point of technological, I don't know if you've noticed it, but we've reached a point of technological saturation. I grew up through the 1990s and into the early 2000s. And when I was 13 years old, we just passed 9/11. When I was 13 years old, two twin towers were struck by two airplanes, and two buildings were crushed and crumbled. And a lot of us watched that in live TV. Some of us that were old enough,
Yeah, I
and they
remember that.
grounded all air traffic in North America. Okay. And it was a big deal. And those of us who were too young to remember that are what they would be considered into the Zoomer generation, right? Right. If you were like 3 years or younger or 5 years or younger, you wouldn't quite remember that watershed. There's certain moments in time that it's what we call collective consciousness, right? That we all witness and we all have a memory of. And we were all there for the Berlin Wall falling, right? We were there for, Bill Clinton getting elected, and we were there for George W. Bush and the whole aftermath of what happened with that. And I don't want to get into the politics of it. I just wanted to highlight how memory can affect our consciousness, right? And how we apply memory to our consciousness. And I write quite a bit about this, and I podcast quite a bit about this. And there's such things as cognitive biases. You have to be aware of your cognitive bias. And a cognitive bias is something that's been imposed upon you by your upbringing, your social construct, your place in the world, how you think. And the one thing you have to remember is that not everyone views life or has the same life view as you do, and you can't expect them to have the same life view that you do. So you have to start using what I learned in another program is called the platinum rule. So everyone's heard of the golden rule, right? The golden rule is treat others as you'd like to be treated. The platinum rule is to reach people where they're at.
Yes.
Right. And if you're not reaching people where they're at, you're not speaking their language, you're not communicating at their language. It's the same reason why Donald Trump talks at a third grade level when he addresses his audiences, right? And, for a lack of a better term, after World War II, I'm going into the history a little bit, but you can research all these facts. They're not made up facts, but the Rockefeller Foundation, right, amassed quite a large fortune between the 1900s into the 1950s.
Yeah.
And they started to privatize healthcare. They started to privatize the education system, and they brought in a very specific curriculum and this is an approved curriculum for the masses. They call it public school for a reason. It's to, I don't want to word the word education is a misnomer, right? And it's really more about teaching to a set curriculum and a way to think. And after about the 1990s and into the 2000s, and now it's accelerated since about 2010 onward, we aren't using our critical thinking skills anymore. So bringing it back around to the Doomer Boomer Institute here, it's a program that you from the previous programming that you already had. So it's just like a double negative makes a positive. In mathematics, you take your double negatives and you make a positive. Okay, the negative experience and the negative programming,
yeah,
and the trauma that you've had and the negative biases that you've had, we're not saying that we're scrubbing you or brainwashing you or turning you into a completely different person. We're breaking you down, or the program itself is designed to take you as you are at face value, and then apart your individual thinking processes through a 12-step matrix, right? And it's a choose your own adventure, right? I personally subscribe to the health, wealth, and wisdom pillars, but there's 12 individual pillars you can choose. I don't want to list them all right now because I might butcher it, but there's
part of your framework, right, to self mastery.
This is part of my framework towards self mastery. Right. I'm also on the Taoist, Christian, and Stoic path, where I've combined the philosophies of Taoism, Christianity, and Stoicism, and I've taken the best and I've decided to leave the rest behind. I don't really subscribe to Old Testament thinking of Christianity. I follow the Beatitudes of Jesus, and I also have thrown in Marcus Aurelius's think and teachings with a little bit of Epictetus. And then, of course, Lao Tzu's Taoism, and I have a podcast of the same name. You can check it out. It's the Daily Daoist on all platforms. And that's where I would say, usually bi-weekly or weekly readings from Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life, with essays by Wayne Dyer, with my little twist thrown in, and my current understandings in the modern times, right? And one of the major themes out of that book is that if we had Tao leadership and if we followed Tao principles in the world and we weren't so concerned about getting more and getting mine, we would have not a utopia, but we would have an individual self-actualization on Maslow's hierarchy of needs that we've never ever seen in the past 250 years, right?
Yeah.
And that's really the goal of humanity, is not to get more and get mine. It's to get to the point where the child in Africa or the child in India or the child in any third world country has the same sort of opportunities that we do in the first world, right? And you have to think about how grateful you are to have clean drinking water and clean running water and be able to go to the grocery store and pick up food, and stop complaining about gas prices, because you have the ability to make the payments and you have the ability to put the fuel in your car or truck. And
Yeah, it's
it's
really about
not,
changing our perspective, right? We tend
yeah,
to take a lot of things for granted in the West because of everything that we have. We have so much abundance, yet there's so much poverty here.
yeah,
Poverty mindset, poverty in its actual sense. You talked about third world countries. We don't have to go far. Look at any of
no,
our cities downtown, and how much this has just changed because our mindsets have been so fixed towards what we think life should be like, and yet we have lost the motivation, the drive, and the passion to make any type of change in life.
yeah. And I think where I was going with this, I was
Yeah.
using the third world as an example because I think people can not relate to it more. But it's just like, why are we sending? I'm of the mindset that given a certain population's ability to change and become better, if the one thing that they always talk about is educating women, and then therefore their children will then be educated, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen this work, but at the same time, the Western decline has really been on the decline. And it's a combination of things. It's the hyperinflation I was talking about, but it's also the no fault divorce laws, the changing of the legislation and language around gender ideological lines. And also, we've also decided that we're going to be dependent on our governments for everything. And that's sliding towards socialism, and then also sliding towards a form of communism, which we know historically doesn't work. It leads to authoritarianism. And we've seen that in the last 5 years, 3 and a years, especially through COVID times, the
Yep.
government lockdowns telling people how to do their lives and how to put, like, take autonomy of their own physical body and their own property, right? And we've seen bank accounts frozen during the trucker convoy, private bank accounts, just because the government said so. And again, I don't look at myself as revolutionary or even that rebellious. I look at myself as very critical thinking, critically minded, and I'm still seeing this in the world and in the news and in my daily life. And again, I view everything as a spectrum, right? Like, if you look at the doomer bloomer logos and the messaging I put out there, right? It's everything is a spectrum. We
Agreed.
tend to look at things in the black and white, and we don't look at things from the middle's perspective. But there's really a 360 perspective on every sort of issue you can imagine,
Yeah.
right? And coming back to, we don't have enough, not don't have enough, but we're not allocating, right? The Tao says that you must take from surplus and give to deficiency. The government have reversed that cycle of reciprocation that's supposed to happen naturally in ecological systems, right? We're an ecosystem, just like a natural ecosystem. Like, we are humans, but we're also animals. Are we any different than birds or bears or fish or any other sort of living creature, right?
Mhm.
And instead of doing that and getting along harmoniously as the Tao flows, we've decided to take a very antithetical view on, we've decided that we're God. Okay. Part of you is God, part of you is source, part of you is creator. We're made in the image thereof, not we're not meant to play God. And we've gotten to the point where we have the Monsantos of the world, the Modernas of the world, and the Pfizers of the world saying that we're going to play God and dictate to the masses how we're going to, how you're going to live your life, right? Elaine, you have to live a certain way. You have to eat a certain amount of meat per year. You're not allowed to have dairy products. You can't, you have to walk to work. You have to live in a 15-minute city. You don't have a choice anymore. You're locked down in this little quadrant of Winnipeg, and if you don't order your groceries from Instacart, you're a bad person. And I'm just using you as an example, but that could be anything,
Yep.
any person, anywhere, you know. And I grew up very rural, and the rural mindset is very different from the city mindset, right? We moved from rural to the city around the middle 1900s and
Mhm.
into the 1930s and 1940s. And all history cycles run about in roughly 80-year cycles. And we're hitting the end of another 80-year cycle from 1945 to 20, right? And we're seeing hard times come back around, and it's creating hard times create strong men and women. And we're seeing the return, hopefully, of more traditional values. I am seeing it in my because I'm a teacher by profession and trade as well, and I also run the 3 businesses that I have. And I don't even want to call them businesses. They're projects, they're life tasks. They weren't really created by me. I don't look at them as creations by me. They were downloaded through me,
Yeah.
right? And I'm a conduit of creation, not necessarily the creator itself. And just, and I talk about it on my own podcast,
Mhm.
so I'm going to just talk about it here, is coming back to the trauma aspect of it all.
Yeah.
I personally was hospitalized twice, and almost 3 times in the last 3 years, right? Through the trauma that I had to go through and grow through. And I was self-medicating, or trying to self-medicate with alcohol. I was trying to self-medicate with psychedelics, and I was trying to push through my trauma rather than feel my trauma,
Mm.
right? Because this is something I've told Elaine before in the past, is that the amount of time you spend under tension, okay, is the amount of time that is required to absorb it and process it. A compressed spring, when let go, will let go with the same amount of force that's pressed onto it. So my life, for a lack of a better term, was forged under a crucible type environment. And I had a bit of a hardcore dad, and his dad before him was very hardcore. And my grandpa was hard on my dad, and my dad was hard on me. And we didn't get along very well. And we still have a very rocky relationship to this day. And we're still absorbing that, 3 generations worth of tension, and I call it the broken link. And it's the reason why I changed my name, because I don't want to be associated with that pain and that disappointment and regret and the anger and the suffering of 3 generations, because even my grandfather had a stepdad who wasn't very nice to him either. And it just compounded and compounded and compounded. And I'm all about chakral healing, right? We have the 7 chakras of our body, And it's very important to keep those into chakra alignment. Do you want to jump in on there, Elaine?
Yeah, no, I really like the direction you're going, and I wanted to, and thank you so much for, sharing some different pieces of your life story, your hero's quest, and how you've really used these things. And while at times it may have felt, pretty dark places, but you've been able to shift that energy and change that the way it's showing up for you in life to do things that bring meaning and purpose in your life. And I just wanted to touch on a little bit more. I know you do the Daily Daoist podcast, and I think it's a phenomenal podcast. I love listening to that one. And it's really been to me, in the time that I've known, has really been that one grounding piece for you to come back to. And so I wanted to ask you, like, the opening sentence in the Tao says something to the effect of, a way that can be walked is not the way.
Or the Tao that can be known, or the Tao that can be known is not the eternal Tao.
Yeah.
Right. So even putting words to the Tao is not the Tao.
Yeah.
Also, there's a verse in there that says that those who know do not speak. So you don't go around as a Taoist saying, I'm a Taoist, look at me, I'm a Taoist. You don't even say, you just you just are, and you just show up, right? Like this podcast. And there's a term that I've been throwing around, and I've been talking with a sociology professor at my school now, and I wrote this on some of my mind maps as I was doing my life calculations and building out the program. But there's a concept of beyond concepts, and I've debated this with my brother on several occasions, because he's a bit of a debater, and I'm not much of a debater, but I can usually bring it around in a conversational tone. But there's a concept of no concepts, or beyond concepts. So what happens when a thought, right? Because we're driven by thoughts. We make over 35,000 or more individual decisions in a day.
Mm-hmm.
And we're a thought driven species. And Alan Watts talks about getting to the point where you're just a thinking being, and that's not really being anymore. And I've experienced both, to be honest, where you get so lost in your thoughts that you think you become your thoughts. And are your thoughts really your reality? What is reality? And because of where I've gone and who I've become, and I have, so-called, therapists, psychiatrists, counselors, doctors talk with me, and they think they're more intelligent than me, or they think they're smarter than me. And they tend to talk down to their patients. And just because you went through 4 years of a bachelor, then 4 years of a medical degree, and you have a master's or a PhD, doesn't necessarily make you smarter or better than somebody else. It just means you read a lot of books, and somebody put a stamp on your butt and said that you read a lot of books, and that you took these classes and you wrote these essays. I've read hundreds, perhaps thousands of books, and I've wrote hundreds, getting into the mid hundreds of essays, and I don't really agree with the current system of, let's go take a 4-year degree and then a master's and a PhD, unless it's something specialized or something technical. The rest of the, classical humanities have just become, for lack of a better word, woke garbage. They're not really teaching you how to critically think. They're indoctrinating you into a way of thinking and an ideological way of being. And it's become a left versus right and a north versus south sort of alignment.
Yeah.
Right. Where we have lawful and legal. And most people don't understand the term between lawful and legal. Okay. Legal is just jargon telling you that, mostly it's about the paperwork involved, and it's about the legalities involved around a specific topic. Lawful is more of about alignment. Like, you want people to be lawful on their own.
Yeah.
And the Tao says that those who are of true virtue act virtuous without being told how to be virtuous.
Mm.
right? A virtuous person doesn't have to be virtuous or be told to be virtuous in the Confucian way of thinking,
Yeah.
which is very law driven and very edict driven. A Tao person is virtue and embodies the characteristics of a virtuous person. And that then informs the way they interact in the world. And, I personally, from a leadership perspective, I follow verse 17 of the Tao Te Ching, which is essentially you must allow people to live their essential natures, whatever that may be.
Right on.
And I'm responsible for, I know, a class of up to 16 people now. And I have a lot of different personalities coming through and personalities I have to interact with. And some of them are quiet. Some of them are more boisterous.
Yeah.
Some of them are in between. Some of them want to learn. Some of them are just there because their parents told them that they have to go to school and do something with their lives.
Yeah.
And coming back around to why the Doomer Bloomer Institute exists, it exists to help people with poverty mindset, people who have been left behind in the world, and people who would like some guidance on getting back into spirit and alignment with the way and the purpose, the purpose of why they're here, and it took me, a very meandering sort of path, and I'm still on that path. But the focus, right? The focus is the most important component of this program, is that you're not dilly-dallying. You're working at a pace that's acceptable to your life's path. And for me personally, it took me to my early 30s to get onto or become a conduit for the message that I'm trying to spread.
Yeah.
And that's planetary awareness, awakening 1.618 billion, which is the golden ratio. So 20% of 8 billion is 1.618 billion all truths only on this planet, because I truly believe that's the salvageable number required for the law of one. So the negative and negative polarities on this planet or earth or plane, and the positive polarities on this planet to fully work in cooperation. Because some people on this planet, or some entities on this planet, are going to work in positive polarity and service of others, and some are going to work in negative polarity and service of self. And they work together, but in opposite polarities.
Yeah.
And it's a push-pull sort of scenario. And if you're living through this history of time and period of time, we're technically entering into the age of Aquarius. So it's a new age, and it's bringing new energy and different energy into our solar system and into our existence, our planetary existence. So it's going to be very bumpy for quite a little bit. But once we get through this like it's just like in an airplane, right? When you go through turbulence, if you believe in the Copernicus theory of revolution of the earth around the sun, and I'm not going to debate people with us on this, but our planetary orbit takes us through a 364 and a bit rotation. 2024 is the next leap year, so we added an additional day on the 29th of February to make up the sun rotation. But the earth actually rotates and is adhering to a 28-day cycle with the moon. And we truly actually have 13 months in a year, not 12. It's one of the reasons why people are out of sync on this planet, because we're not adhering to a 13-month calendar. We're adhering to a 12-month calendar.
Yeah.
And it's deliberately disrupting our equilibrium. So, you're for whatever day of, I don't even know what the lunar cycle is, but I have a lunar cycle app, and I'm very in touch with the lunar cycles. I would highly recommend getting a grounding mat or a grounding bed, even, because free energy and free electrons need to go somewhere, and we're definitely, out of alignment. Even this conversation, like, if you have a sitting desk, consider getting a standing desk. I've converted my office to a standing desk. I've converted my personal office to a standing desk. And the difference in energy that I feel when I'm standing versus sitting all day, right, is just, there is no other feeling in the world, right? And I'm used to being around electricity quite a bit, right? But the frequencies of our planet and the frequencies of the power system are not aligned, right? So there's that component. And if you look around the world, and I, again, don't want to get into it too much, but there's certain buildings and certain churches and certain monasteries, they're harmonic resonators, right? They're meant to amplify the harmonic frequencies of the planet. Everything vibrates, everything moves as per Hermetic principles. And we're on a vibrating Hermetic planet, Hermetic Earth. And do you believe that you were anything more than a mass? Like there's your spiritual body, and then there's your physical body. And the one of the main, important things is to get your spirit and your physical bodies aligned.
Yeah.
My like one of my big things, especially the first time I went to the hospital, is that my spiritual body and my physical body were completely out of synchronization with one another. And what ended up happening is I had a break, like what they would call a typical psychotic break. But I don't really truly believe that it was a psychotic break in a sense, because I touched an area or a physical reality or a divine presence entered my life, right? Because I was in and out of consciousness for a better part of 4 days, and I don't remember all of it, but I do know that there was something or someone watching over me, or I would have ended up something worse, right? And I truly believe it was Christ, Jesus, or some entity thereof, or some angelic presence, and it saved my life. Or I don't think I would be here, to be honest. And the second time around, it was a very similar but different, because my alignments were coming back more centered.
Right.
And I had more control this time, right? And I didn't just, completely lose touch of reality. I knew where I was, I knew who I was, but I couldn't explain in words what was happening to me properly, right? And then the third time around, it was like, okay, I know what this is. I know who I am, where I am. I went to the hospital, but they couldn't admit me at the time. So I went to my aunt's house and I just chilled out and I grounded myself. And, you have to, start with one of the main things that I have running all the time is Tibetan singing bowls. And I have the 528 hertz heart healing frequency going in the background quite a lot of the time.
Yes.
That frequency band especially is important for people who need or want to heal trauma, because if you don't, it will manifest as disease, and disease manifests itself in a cellular level, and it can hijack some of the cellular level and then become cancerous. Right. And a lot of the treatments for cancer could be really, really solved by going through a sonic treatment or a sonic frequency treatment, right? Some of these, other drugs that they use are just part of the pharmaco non-human cure. Your body can heal itself given the right mental aptitude and the proper instruction, right? And people like Dr. Joe Dispenza have proven that, right? He healed himself from a traumatic crippling back injury during his triathlon. I haven't gone, like I have back issues, but they're a lot less painful than they could be because of the self-care that I do.
Man, well, you've got such an incredible story. We've been working together here for just over a year now, and every time I hear you tell your story, I always learn a little bit more about the work that you've done. How much you've seen you grow and evolve has been just phenomenal. And so, as we come to wrap up this episode, if there's one thing that maybe we didn't get a chance to touch on today, what would be the one thing you would want our guests to remember about our conversation?
Don't do it alone. Reach out to family, reach out to a close friend, put me or schedule me or Elaine in your calendar. It's a free call. It's 15 minutes of your day that could potentially change your entire life, right? And comparatively, I think to what, if you're really looking to get from that doomer dark place, like I'm ready to like not be here anymore, to hey, I want to do something positive and empowering in the world, and I want to make my own specific mark on the world, whether that's, skateboarding videos or anything in between, right? Like there's a market and a niche for what you have. If you're, a so-called relative expert in an area, reach out to either myself or Elaine, and not think that you're alone in the 1.918 billion of all truths only. And you'll definitely thank your future self if you
Yeah,
make that call.
absolutely. That's just outstanding. So much, buddy, for being on the show. And you've been able to shed a little bit of light for us, and hopefully people have get an understanding of the types of journey to going from doomer to bloomer and being so much more in their lives. So if anyone is interested in getting a hold of you and participating in your work, what would you suggest to be the best way for them to do that?
I would go to any of my Twitter pages at Doomer Podcast, at the Daily Daoist, at Yukon Gold Limited, and reach out directly to my Calendly link, which I can give you, and search Doomer Bloomer Patreon and take the free 7-day trial. And then we can potentially negotiate from there, right? And I can help you start getting on that path from becoming, or going from a doomer to a bloomer, becoming an all truths only. You guys select your own 12 or your 3 main pillars that you want to select, and me and Elaine, in conjunction with his Awakened Man Band of Brothers program, can get you where, or get you to a point where you need to be, or where you want to be in your life.
Right on, brother. I'm going to make sure I'm going to put all that information in our show notes for today's episode, as well as your Substack messaging as well. You did some phenomenal articles there, and information on Substack. Just want to say once again, brother, thank you so much for being on the show. Really enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise, and as always, namaste. And I love each and every one of you in the Mandelbrot universe. Cheers.